Hey guys, welcome back to Clownfish TV. This is Neon. I am not here with Geeky Sparkles in this video, but we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons and the fallout, I guess, from Wizards of the Coast announcing that they're going to remove the term race from their tabletop game. Yes, they're no longer going to use race in Dungeons & Dragons because it's problematic, because monsters are people too. So we're going to look at some reactions on Wizards DnD official Twitter account. And I have to give a hat tip to Black Sage D, who sent this over to me. I missed it, and I'll tell you why, because this was actually a response to another tweet. They buried it. They buried that they were going to get rid of the term race. And we're gonna see what people are saying about it. It's kind of funny. Players are rejecting this change. I have a feeling that people are going to use the term race at their own tables anyway, because look, again, we are talking about fantasy monsters, fictitious monsters, not people. None of these monsters are stand-ins for any kind of people, despite what the Mary Sue says. And we're going to talk about their ridiculous defense of this, because of course they're defending it, because they always strike a contrary position from the majority of fandom, don't they? That's kind of their brand. The Mary Sue is contrary. That should be their tagline. So we're going to talk about that and the numerous apologies that led up to this. Before we get into it any further, please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants. Guys, over 282,000 subs. Thank you for the support. Make sure you're still subscribed. Hit the subscribe button. I know YouTube likes to unsubscribe people if they haven't interacted with the channel in a while. So make sure that you hit that button. So I found this today, ironically enough, that the Associated Press said Oxford Dictionary said that Goblin Mode has been selected by Online Vote as its word of the year. Well, one, it's two words, right? It's a phrase. It defines the term as behavior which is unapologetically self-indulgent, lazy, slovenly, or greedy. Metaverse and I Stand With finished as runners-up. That's great. Except last year, they were trying to cancel J.K. Rowling for her portrayal of goblins. They said that the goblins were a stand-in for Jewish people, even though they clearly were not. So somebody needs to tell Oxford, one, that's two words, Oxford Dictionary, and two, there was a big controversy around having those personality traits intertwined with goblins because it offended real-world people. About 12 real-world people were offended on Twitter by J.K. Rowling's goblins 20 years after the movies came out, by the way. You know, they're just looking for a reason to cancel J.K. But yeah, that brings me back to this. You know, this whole thing about Wizards of the Coast constantly apologizing for race, constantly apologizing for offending Twitter, offending Tumblr, offending their 5e fan base. And, you know, eventually it's going to come to a head. I think it's not sustainable financially. And we're already seeing that Wizards of the Coast is in trouble because of Magic the Gathering. They've produced too many cards. There's too much subpar material out there. And they were trying to make bank off the pandemic, right? So what's interesting is if you go out to this Mary Sue article, they talk about how problematic it is. They said the new playtest material includes an update to the Ardling Dragonborn Goliath species and reads in part, the peoples of the D&D multiverse hail from many worlds and are peoples of many different sapient forms of life. A player's character's species is the set of game traits that an adventurer gains from being one of those life forms. God, this is like birthing persons, right? A character's upbringing and training are represented in the rules by class and background. Some species can trace their origin to a single word, plane of existence, or god, while other species appear in multiple realms at once. Whatever a species' origin story is, its members have spread across the multiverse and contribute to various cultures. They're cultured dragonborn. So they're like, look, and the Mary Sue joined in on the dogpiling, right? It seems unlikely that removing the term race from the source material will completely resolve the issue of fantasy racism in Dungeons & Dragons. There was no issue. There was no issue of fantasy racism in Dungeons & Dragons. There is no history of racism in Dungeons & Dragons other than what the media has put there in the last 5 to 6 years. they keep having this quote unquote conversation because we have a lot of new players coming in. And these new players, a lot of them are coming from like Tumblr and Twitter, and they're bringing their baggage with them, and they're bringing it to the game, and they're making the game say things it didn't say. Orcs are not black people, okay? The Hadozi, the flying monkey slave race, not black people, if that's what you're thinking, just like goblins aren't Jewish people. But if you're ascribing those personality traits to a group of individuals, you know, I mean, come on. Despite making these necessary and welcome updates, WotC took several steps backward earlier this year when it released an updated version of Spelljammer, including a species known as the Hadozi, which I think came from Star Frontiers, actually, being depicted with minstrel imagery. No, they look like a bard. In addition to having a background story tied to slavery and forced eugenics. Following significant backlash on social media, I don't think it was significant. I think it was, again, a handful of people in their old accounts on Twitter. Wizards updated its digital Spelljammer content on D&D Beyond to remove these elements. Now we're getting rid of the term race, and then after that, we're going to find something else to be offended about. We're absolutely going to find something else to be offended about. So let's look at some of the comments here on Twitter. Whether you prefer the term race, species, folk, people, ancestry, heritage, or something else to differentiate orcs from elves, one thing is guaranteed. Someone who spends too much time online can tell you you're a horrible person for that preference. So what's your preference? Oh, thank God. I was worried you might have been focusing on something important. Glad to see that's not the case. I remember that back in the 80s and 90s, a common complaint was that race was the wrong term to use. Now that D&D finally does what it's been asked to for 40 plus years, I'm sure someone will complain that's too woke. I don't know about too woke, unnecessary, completely unnecessary, and indicative of modern wizards constantly trying to appease a mob of people that are looking to constantly be outraged by some minutia. Yes, by all means, let us pretend that referring to each other's characters as being different species is really somehow less divisive than saying race. Was anyone ever really triggered by hearing that dwarves and elves are different races? No. I think what happened was when we started bringing more monster races into the mix, more playable monster races, and that was like, well, you know, these are historically evil monsters, but I want to be a good person playing this monster, so you can't say that my people, my fictitious people, are bad people. Here, this person, our Arcanus Press says, changing the word from race to species does nothing to address the issue. This seems wrong. Different species cannot interbreed, and peoples in D&D can. At least in some cases. Is peoples less divisive, or is there still some racist overtones? What's your peeps? Now they're going over species and ancestry. What's the point? You guys can't go out of business fast enough. No reason to change the logical term for make-believe storybook creatures that are actually different races, unlike the real world where there's only a human race. But as always, you do your table, I'll do our table. Pretty pathetic, anyone getting emotional about it either way. So the final nail in the coffin of half X people because, well, basic biology, a difference between species and race, but you remove them already from the new options. I don't know about that. The problem I see with your choice of alternative is the scientific definition. In nature, members of different species cannot produce offspring. Half-elves, half-orc, etc. would cease to exist. It could confuse some people. The whole damn thing is confusing and unnecessary. Species, it's not a complaint about species. Race has connotations of acknowledging that these are groups of intelligent people. Species has connotations of treating them as animals. This is literally a step backwards and has worse implications when analyzed to a real-world perspective. Good on you for removing race, but I'm not sure species is a lot better. I really hope you change the barbarian to berserker. Makes more sense. I don't know. I think reading several different people have said ancestry might fit better. I think it's all dumb. We're talking about fictitious monsters. Defined words should not be used. No, defined words should not be used. You need to ask Oxford for the definition of single words as it adds goblin mode to its lexicon, right? So let's see what some of the quote tweets are. Not reading all this, my dwarf warrior is still allowed to call elves knife ears or no. Society, when D&D bends itself in its entirety, once it realizes the game is fascist. Oh my God. You have to be in a society absolutely saturated with racism to come up with fantasy races. There's no path to wokeify it. I guess, shout out, trying to do better, but also LOL, they picked the one term that sounds even more like phrenologists discussing orcs and goblins. Just steal PF2E's shit at this point. Let me get dwarven abilities and cultural shit because my elf was adopted. I have to say that for a game that's about players creating worlds and environments that they want and not specifically adhering to rules as written, this is a pointless change. It is pointless. Now you'll have the same idiots you want to please attacking you by claiming the use of species won't solve the imaginary problem. You bunch of C words. Your brand is dead. Here, yeah, exactly. Right underneath that. I feel like going from race to species is a half-foot step sideways. The problem wasn't the specific word race. It was the biological essentialism that doesn't go away when you use species. The problem is with these fictitious monsters or races, they do have biological advantages. They are not human. They're not human. We're not talking about different skin tones or different ethnicities of human beings. We're talking about creatures that are entirely different. They might be humanoid, but they are very different from humans. And that is the fundamental problem. Yes, there's going to be biological essentialism, just like dogs and cats have different biologies. And you can't mix the two of them together. That'd be interesting. That'd be kind of cute. But you can't, well, unless it's cat dog, and that's horrifying. But they have different traits. They have different abilities and different preferences and different strengths and weaknesses based on their biology because they're not human races. And at the end of the day, it's all freaking fantasy. It's all make-believe. And I think a lot of players at this point are just going to use their own house rules and just do what they're going to do, or they're just going to forget all about 5e and 1 D&D and go back to playing OSR, go back to playing, first edition, second edition, Pathfinder, other alternatives. There are so many alternatives to D&D these days. You do not have to play Wizards D&D if you don't want to. So I'm going to wrap this up. Please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants, guys. We'll talk later.